welcome. We're excited to have you joining us today for our webinar where we'll be sharing findings from interviews that were conducted with faculty and other college practitioners on co-requisite courses in math and English. My name is Michelle White. I'm a senior researcher with the RP group, and just to give a little bit of background on this study, it was designed to capture promising practices taking place in California community colleges, but it's part of a larger ongoing examination of co-req support that's aimed at understanding how the use of co-reqs can help maximize students' completion of transfer level English and math. So just for those who might not be as familiar with co-req support, before we dive into the key findings, these types of courses are designed to provide students with extra help so they can enter and succeed in transfer level courses, particularly English and math courses, which we know tend to be those gateway classes. With co-req support, students enroll directly into transfer level while concurrently enrolling in a separate course. And that separate course offers just-in-time support and academic assistance. So this essentially allows students to avoid a long sequence of prereqs while working toward their educational goal. So as part of this research, we met with educational leaders, including faculty, department chairs, and deans that work in colleges that have demonstrated exceptional academic outcomes. And the interviews provided an opportunity to let us go beyond what we were seeing in the quantitative data to better understand co-req support through firsthand experience. So today we're going to be talking about some of the design structures, placement recommendations, and pedagogical approaches that colleges are using to support their students. So one of the first questions we were interested in answering was, what do these courses look like? How are they structured? What are some of the characteristics of these courses that are offered in colleges where we're seeing students succeed? And for the majority of the colleges we spoke to, their co-requisites are credit bearing. 2 units really seems to be that sweet spot, although we did see some variation in unit load. When we asked why colleges chose to make these courses credit bearing, what we heard is that it communicates to students the value and significance the course offers. So it helps students understand that, one, attendance is required, it's not optional or voluntary, but it also communicates to students that there will be additional time and effort needed to complete the class. Another thing we learned from colleges is how important it is to make it easy for students to register. So it should be clear from the co-req support how to register, and colleges have done a lot of work to streamline that process for courses that include co-reqs. Rather than having 2 separate sections where a student might have to enroll individually, the colleges have moved to a system where the class is hard linked. So if a student signs up for the parent course, they're automatically enrolled in the support section. Another thing we learned is that the co-req is often taught by the same instructor in the same classroom and scheduled back to back. This is giving an extension to the regular lecture course. It's scheduled as a continuation of the course rather than what some models do, which is more of a lecture and lab structure, where the students are actually returning on a separate day. So you might think, wow, that's a lot of time for students to actually sit in a classroom. It is, but if you think about how long students might be spending on their own when they don't have that structured support, integrating the lecture and lab or lecture and co-req is really actually saving students time when it's delivered as a seamless experience. Another attribute we learned from these courses is that faculty are utilizing embedded tutors in the classrooms. So they're providing this just-in-time class support. Students are getting the help they need right then and there. So rather than actually having them have to seek out tutoring services elsewhere, we're meeting students where they are. Students are also actually accessing some of those math and learning centers where they can get some of that tutoring assistance, but it's wraparound services. So we're not just offering it in class, it's outside class as well as other modalities. So another question we were really interested in learning more about is, what do we do with students who fail? And we're at a point in AB 705 implementation where we're actually able to track some of those outcomes, where we're seeing students who are entering transfer level straight away and seeing how they fare. So we wanted to know, what interventions or recommendations are colleges offering students to help get them back on track should they not successfully complete the class? And we were really interested in knowing, does that differ if the student was enrolled in a class with a co-requisite versus not having the co-requisite support? What we learned was that students who failed transfer level math or English with the co-requisite support are generally instructed to retake the course with the co-requisite, but colleges are also using kind of a case management approach to identify and address some of those barriers that are believed to contribute to their not passing of the course. So that goes into, digging a little bit deeper into why students are actually failing. Is it just academic reasons? What we're learning is that no, it's often a combination of personal and academic factors, things like school life balance, managing childcare, transportation, prioritizing their mental and physical health. So these are things that have to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. And what we heard from colleges is that it's really just, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Colleges are working with students who fail to help connect them to the resources and supports that meet their specific needs. So we asked a little bit about, okay, what do these models look like? What does the design and structure look like? And colleges are utilizing a variety of teaching methods to support students in co-req courses. Some of the key classroom characteristics that surfaced in the interviews, faculty are using kind of a combination of individual and group work. There's a lot of students teaching students and a lot of learning going on within small groups. There's also more time on task. So the co-requisite supports are offering students not just additional activities and curriculum, but also just getting time to actually focus on the work before they leave the campus. There's also a focus on developing metacognitive skills and learning how to be a good college student. For many of these students, they might be first generation, or this might be their first time entering college in their first year, for instance, and learning things like how to prioritize tasks, how to manage their time, how to organize their work are vital skills for helping them succeed in transfer level. Colleges are also embedding courses in learning communities, we learned, and because of this, students feel more connected to the course in a much bigger way. So they're not alone like they might feel in a traditional lecture setting. They have the opportunity to kind of seek out help from their peers. And in these learning communities, tutoring is often integrated. So they're kind of engaging and working together. There's also close collaboration amongst with these learning centers. So they're providing the embedded support, and they're doing this in both online and face-to-face courses. So we wanted to really delve in deep into how colleges are addressing student achievement and equity. So how can we offer students the focused support they need? What additional flexibility can we embed in the curricular structure and course design to ensure all students are set up for success? There were really three things that came through loud and clear in our interviews with faculty and college practitioners. One is that they're engaging in a regular and ongoing review of disaggregated data. And this is not just at the institutional level, it's really looking at student course and student learning outcome data and understanding deeply, what those trends actually signify, and ensuring that that data ends up in the hands of those that can actually do something with it to make some of those changes and support those interventions. Colleges are also infusing courses with anti-racist curriculum and pedagogy, so implementing evidence-based practices and teaching methods that are known to improve equitable outcomes. So this is, based on ongoing research. We've been doing this as a field for many years, and there's a lot of work that has come out to support different teaching methods and strategies that faculty can use to support students in their classroom. Equitable grading is another area that came up during the interview. So what we learned is that sometimes students will talk about different instructors, and they might actually recognize that some instructors are known as what they call lovingly as hard graders. So students are utilizing things like rate my professor, word of mouth, to really decide which instructor to take the course in. And so what colleges are working towards is finding ways to really ensure that grading is aligned so that faculty members are using essentially, so students who enroll in a class will get the same experience if they're putting in the effort. So their grade will be consistent regardless of the faculty that they're receiving instruction under. And then lastly, colleges are engaging in professional development. So they're centering a lot of this work around anti-racist curriculum and pedagogy, looking at topics such as implicit bias, systemic racism, accessibility, and universal design. And these models are built from a vast body of knowledge that's emerged as a result of different skills development and acceleration principles with a focus on equity. All right, now we have the opportunity to hear from two colleges that took part in the interviews. They're going to be sharing some insights and innovations happening in their co-requisite support models. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve Schessler from Cabrillo College's English department.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone.
Thank you. I'm just going to address the chat while you get loaded. Go ahead and load your slides behind me. But there are a couple questions. So in the chat, and I think these are more to maybe the participants, because I'm sure you all have different types of co-requisites at your campuses. So are there any colleges who mandate that students who have failed must retake with a co-requisite? So see if that applies to you, maybe note which college you're at in the chat. And then how are you offering your co-requisite on different modalities, online versus on campus, or short-term or compressed courses versus full-term? So just kind of share in the chat what college you're at and how you might be offering your co-requisite. Thank you.
Thanks, Mallory, and I'll share that too. So at Cabrillo, we're going to be taking a look at our co-rec for English 1A. I'm here with Terrence. Hi, Terrence. Our Dean of Planning and Research, and this was a presentation put together with my colleagues, Adela and Tina, who are teaching in the co-rec. I wanted to start off. Whoop, went too far already, Steve. Hold on. Lost control. All right. A little bit of background for co-rec design. That this came up with some context for the basic skills work pre-AB 705. So we had a long lead time to look at acceleration before the state mandated that we did. And that really helped us plan and, of course, evaluate and consider what was going on as we were looking at our data. A little bit of context. This is our success rate by academic year. English 1A with our co-rec is in teal, and with our non-co-rec is in dark gray. And what we're looking at, we see 2017-18, of course, was pre-institution of the co-rec, pre-AB 1705. What we see is pretty strong results. So we know that with AB 1705, we dropped all of our pre-transfer level courses, and we held pretty steady with that, right? Our volume greatly increased of students getting through 1A. And our system at Cabrillo has been to highly recommend students with a GPA below 2.6 register for English 1A with a co-rec. And that would be, placed in their ed plan. Of course, they can enroll in whatever class they still like. We're not mandating English 1A with a co-rec as we continue to gather data and work with that. And you'll note that we were doing really well. COVID came, numbers dipped a bit. And one of the first changes, and something we're working with now, is especially last year's data, where we took a significant decrease, and we know we're dealing with a lot of COVID learning loss. Especially what we're thinking about now is how we can take the co-rec that we have and revise it and retool it for the challenges we're seeing this particular cohort of students facing, and that we expect to see for the next few years. Our curriculum has 5 elements. The first is metacognitive. The second is for engagement and critical thinking. The third is in writing support. The fourth is reading reinforcement. And the fifth is enhanced research. So I'm going to touch on these just briefly with some of our department's best practices. So when we think about sharing metacognitive lessons, we're really looking at helping make the class as student ready as possible and engaging with the students where they are. That includes a lot of introspection for the students so that they understand why they're in class, what's going on, what the goals are, how to understand the course design, the assignments they're giving, what readings they have. We stress a lot of collaboration. We know certainly students coming from some high school models are used to very independent work and that there's a right answer that they're working towards. We, of course, are focusing way more on the discussion and the processes by which they're analyzing information. That includes making sure they're comfortable in class, checking in with them on a regular basis to understand what's going on in their lives and how we can support them, and sharing other metacognitive activities and texts. We also, for critical thinking engagement, this is a challenge for many students, as I'm sure you all know, that they can often sometimes come into class and not be feeling empowered. And we have to let them know that they already have that power, right? Part of that's in choosing culturally relevant topics and texts, things that will resonate with them immediately and won't be a challenge for them to connect with. Giving them a lot of choice, supporting them with alternative media, such as videos, social media, photography, etc. Where this helps in the COREC especially is that we have the English 1A content, which is research paper focused. And in that parent course, there's not always room in the curriculum or in the class time to do the alternative formats and to explore, right? We have to be teaching them MLA and paragraphs and research processes. So here it's more time to explore, work through text with them, help them understand how to select a topic of interest and engage with it, and then share other resources. For writing support, this partners with our parent class of 1A by offering them more low stakes assignments to scaffold their work even further in the COREC. Having assignments that particularly address their identities, and then having a lot of time hands-on looking at models and samples, taking a look, not only providing them a sample, but looking at it, analyzing it, looking at what the student did well in the sample, what areas might need room for improvement. Gives them time to start assignments with that immediate feedback as well. And then we're piloting Grammarly Premium in our CORECs to support their grammar writing. I'll report more on that in a few years, but for now it seems to be going well for those students who are adopting. All right, and then 2 more, reading reinforcement. We know this is a major area of student need, especially coming out of the COVID years with their online work, that they really do need further breaking down of scaffolding text. We know this from our acceleration work as well. So it's a good time to practice all of the best practices, make sure they're getting the academic rigor that's necessary for English 1A, but giving them the safe place to explore it, understand it, check in with each other, and work through that material. Lastly, with enhanced research, we also have a library COREC that does support research. That's 1 unit. So in partnership with that, they're getting a lot of great research support. They already have a connection with the librarians, but we use the COREC to further that as well. And we, again, get to explore things that may be outside the traditional curriculum and the course outline for English 1A. So looking at alternative forms of research, looking at how students can engage and explore those other sources, and make time for things like interviews, right? There's just the time and the space for students to be creative and then bring that back to their research writing. And I wanted to briefly share before I turn over to Terrence, our colleague in California, Elena Tinker Diaz, put together a compendium of Gateway Transfer Level English and its supports for California community colleges. I highlighted some of these at a recent conference that I was at with other schools, but there's a great, and I'll drop this link in the chat, other course outlines of record. One of the things that, if you take a look at this, you'll notice, as Michelle stated, 2 units does seem to be the sweet spot, but there is some variety in how schools have approached it. There's also a lot of similarities in terms of some of the COREC strengths, but they're a different focus depending on the school and how it's partnered. So it's just interesting to note, kind of look at these all side by side. Terrence, I will turn over to you and just give me a nod when you want me to hit the next slide.
All right, sounds good. And hopefully I don't nod out, listen to my own self. So welcome everyone. So Steve said a lot of great stuff. It all sounds good, and it should work. And so therefore, because Steve is an expert teacher, then we should take his word for it and assume the students will go well, and we can go home and I can have a cup of coffee. Nope, not good enough, right? Steve is an expert teacher, but we want to evaluate. We want to help him and his colleagues understand, is what they're doing working well. So to get us in the mind frame, I'm starting off with a couple of slides here. Michelle White will notice that two of them look familiar, but there's a new one. So the upper one, if this was a live audience, I'd say, what movie is that from? It is not a live audience. I'm short on time, so I'm going to tell you, this is from the 1979 Disney movie, The Black Hole. It's a very terrible movie, but it was good fun when I was a kid, and they have an artist rendition of a black hole. And we had inferred that black holes existed from indirect evidence. No one had seen a black hole. There's a lot of math, a lot of theory. How did these gravitationally strong objects impact objects around them? So we infer the existence of black holes. Below are actual real pictures of black holes that we just got recently, that are recently sharpened up. And so now we have direct evidence of black holes. Well, why is this relevant here? Well, we can have both direct and indirect evidence of whether or not corequisites are working. For example, sometimes it's difficult to directly observe that something is happening inside of the student's brain, and you can do surveys and say, hey, did the corec help? And they can say yes or no. But in many ways, we more indirectly observe whether or not corecs work by the impact on success rates and their trajectory into the rest of their academic career. So a lot of times when we think about evaluation or research, we break it into two broad categories. Is it quantitative, like looking at success or throughput rates, engaging in quasi-experimental designs to try to get at causality, or is it more qualitative, where you're doing surveys, focus groups, interviews, ethnographies, where you're sitting in a classroom and observing what's happening? There's somewhat of a false dichotomy. I've had some colleagues say, well, success rates, that's just numbers, and being dismissive of them. However, success rates are made up of the counts of students who did or did not successfully complete a class. And that is a meaningful experience for that student and for the instructor who had to ultimately assign those grades. So saying that numbers don't matter, it's kind of like if you have a bad highway accident and 10 people were involved in it. Well, that's just a number, and it's actually, we're counting experiences that do have impact on people's ability to complete their programs. So it's good to have both. Good mixed methods design. It has some quantitative measures combined with qualitative, helps get at some nuance and explain why things may or may not be working well. You can also have what are called design evaluations, where you have colleagues who are experts come in, take a look at your curriculum, take a look at your class, and give you some feedback about your design, and give you a sense of how the implementation is going to go. In terms of philosophy of evaluation, I always encourage a collaborative evaluation in the spirit of improvement. It's just like classroom assessments. You want the students to do better. You're not trying to tear them down emotionally and making them feel bad. You're trying to give them feedback about where they can improve, and evaluation is the same thing. And also, there is something called an action research paradigm, where, for example, Steve asked me a question. Steve asked me lots of questions. Steve asked me a question today. I don't let him off the hook, right? He becomes part of the research team. He's going to help us design the question, refine it. We'll go back to him with a couple of design parameters to make sure that what he comes up with can be implemented and is useful, and he helps with the interpretation. So this is just one of the things to think about in all research, is the concept of bias, because we want to make sure we get the truth. If something's not working well, we want to know so that we can improve it. Or if something is working well, then we want to know, so then we can enhance it and direct more resources towards it. So there's a boatload of different kinds of biases. The one I've got here diagrammed is a confirmation bias, where you've got your facts and you've got your beliefs, and we tend to pay attention to facts that reinforce our beliefs. It's harder to look at facts that do not conform with our beliefs, and many people like to live in beliefs that have no facts. It's a very comfortable place to be. The uncomfortable place to be is where the facts don't back up our preconceived notions. So it's important to try to go back to being in grad school or other critical thinking classes, be open to possibilities, alternative hypotheses. Why is this happening? What are different mechanisms? Another bias that comes up a lot is survival bias, where we make generalizations based on observations that we see. So for example, well, hey, I know a student who was a high school dropout, and they successfully completed all the remediation sequence without any support. Well, that's great, but they're probably 1 in 100. So you don't want to put weight on the person that you saw because they actually persisted and survived the sequence. You want to look at the totality of all the people who started to get a better sense of what happens to everyone as they go through a particular sequence or an intervention. And there's a whole bunch of others. I just listed a few. It's fun to just go to the Wikipedia page on bias and have a field day and realize that, you know, nothing is actually knowable. All right, let's go ahead and hit the next one. I think is the last one. So this will be in the slides, just, you know, for y'all to take a look at. Steve touched on this some, you know, questions to ask about COREQs. What's the right structure? Should it be mandatory for those with low high school GPA? And if you, or should it be an opt-in? Should it be an opt-out where everyone's in and people can back out? So there's still questions we're working on there. How many units? 2 units does seem to be coming up as a sweet spot. Lecture or lab style, what modality? That was a question in the Q&A. Should it be HiFlex, online, in person? Should you have the same teacher, different teachers, credit, non-credit? So there's all these, as we go into this unknown, a lot of structural questions about what's the right way to implement a COREQ, and a lot of things for us to take a look at. Who's taken the COREQs? We've had a challenge with those with a low high school GPA not taking the COREQs, who should, and then people with high school GPAs taking the extra work because they want that extra support. Is that the best use of our resources? Steve did show a dashboard that he was using for some evaluation work, and they're good for a first cut at taking a look at what's going on. And some dashboards have enough filters in there that you can answer a lot of questions, but dashboards alone are not a substitute for evaluation, because you'll want to, in some cases, control for differences in background characteristics of who's choosing to take COREQs, and also incorporate other factors like what's the alignment between the demographics of the faculty, the demographics of the students, taking a look at grading variability, which is often not portrayed in dashboards. Can we learn from other disciplines is another question. So some disciplines at a campus may have a successful implication and be able to help their colleagues in other disciplines. And there may be fundamental differences in how we design COREQs for, say, humanities versus sciences. And when there's already a lot of discussion around that for equity pedagogy, for example. Put in a couple of resources for you. Mallory and I and Craig, we wrote a chapter in a book about, that's for college composition faculty. And our chapter was, how can you get research to pay attention to you? And so we've got some good tips in there, like, you know, bias food, connect it to department and college priorities, speak the lingo, recognize our other priorities, or like Steve, ask a question every day so we don't forget you. And so, you know, in a friendly way. And then the other chapter we wrote with addition to John Hatz was there's a lot of new metrics out now that we didn't used to look at, like throughput, what percentage of students completed gateway course within a fixed period of time. And taking a look at some of the policy changes around remediation reform and how things have evolved. So just some of our thoughts that may also be helpful and stimulate some ideas for the rest of y'all. Steve, did you have any concluding comments before we start rolling over towards math from Kuyamaka?
Just one, and it piggybacks on what you're talking about. hear, Terrence, that we've been very lucky throughout the process to have very close engagement with our planning and research office. And unlike the presentation you're about to hear, some folks in the English department have struggled with data. And so it has taken a lot of very patient talking through numbers with the faculty. And it's really about building that relationship so that when we're looking at data, it's without becoming defensive, right? Looking at it to really understand what's going on in our classrooms, what's working well, how we're looking at segregated data. Specifically, we're in HSI, so we're very focused on Latinx engagement and student success. And that ties to a lot of our grants and equity plans as well. So just that relationship has been, of course, very helpful and so important for all of the work we've been doing, but especially this is our largest experimental intervention, right? Bringing in this co-rec, changing our course sequence by removing pre-transfer level. So it's been great to study and respond along with it.
Yeah, and you touch on, I didn't put the word equity in there, but that's a key component and strategy of co-recs is to help mitigate equity gaps as well. And so that's an important component of your evaluation too. Thanks for bringing that up, Steve.
So we can turn it over to Kuyamaka.
So I want to start by just saying to everybody that Dan is doing this. Dan Curtis, one of the faculty here, is doing this, and he gets out of class at, or got out of class at 12:30, and hopefully he'll be here when I finish my part. But he should be. So anyway, I just wanted to, thank everybody for coming, and we're here to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with our calculus 1 with co-requisite support class. It's brand new this semester, so I'm just gonna kind of start with a little data, and then Dan is going to talk about what's happening right now in the classroom, because he is teaching the class right now. That's actually the class he's getting out of. So first I want to start with our why. When we first started this, when we started our journey a while ago, back in fall of 2016, when we started offering our very first co-requisite support course, our why became, what is the throughput of students? And so in general, we've been following students over long periods of time, looking at data, making sure that we are following what it is what we're supposed to be doing, and that we're making a difference for students and their success. One of the things that we started to look at was what was happening with Calculus 1, because STEM students are really is one of the areas of biggest concern, right? Why aren't STEM students staying in STEM, that kind of stuff. Excuse me. And so we asked to do this particular data, or asked for this research, and this research essentially was for a cohort of students starting in the fall of 2021 who were enrolled in pre-calculus. What is their throughput in taking, sorry, my phone is ringing, I'm trying to turn it off. Okay, what is their throughput in calculus by the end of the spring semester? So in other words, when you're looking at this slide, you can see we had 191 students at census that were in pre-calculus in fall of 2021. Of those 191 students, 118 were successful. Of those 118, 79 were enrolled in Calculus 1, and of those, 58 were successful in calculus. So this is approximately a 30% success rate. When we first started this, talking about this whole idea of placement, we were talking about, and we were looking at this multiplicative factor of, these exit points. I don't know why I was surprised when I got these results. I don't think anybody else in our department was, but I was, in the sense that if I just take 70% on each of these, right, multiply that 3 times, I would get a 34% success rate. So what we're seeing here is indicative of structure in a lot of ways, right? So one of the things that our department wanted to do was talk about how can we maybe shorten this this pipeline. Also, when we looked at this same exact data disaggregated by ethnicity, we see huge, enormous equity gaps, you know, all over, right? And you'll see that we have Middle Eastern. You won't see a lot of data with that. Cuyamaca College is in El Cajon, which is the second largest Middle Eastern population outside of Detroit in the United States. So we have been disaggregating and asking our students if they come from Middle Eastern descent since 2018. So we're starting to look at that data as well. Either way, we can see we have equity gaps, right? So what is it that we decided we were going to do? Well, based on AB 1705, we can no longer require students to repeat courses that they took in high school, right? So this is a good thing. This is something our college has been trying to do for a while. Mandated by law, we were allowed to finally do it. So we wanted to broaden access to Calculus 1. So we did this by changing our placement rules so that any student who completed pre-calculus in high school now has direct access to calculus. Before, a student who completed pre-calculus in high school would have direct access to calculus if they met a GPA threshold, right? So now we just opened it up. Regardless of their GPA, anybody can get into Calculus 1. In addition, we now added, and this is something that we decided to do, is any student that placed into pre-calculus can now choose to take pre-calculus, or instead they can take calculus with co-requisite support. So those students wouldn't have necessarily taken pre-calculus ever. So this is what we decided to do. Here is how we established our calculus co-requisite support. The structure of that, it's a 2-unit pass, no pass co-requisite. All of our co-requisites that we have are 2-unit with the exception of one. Our quantitative reasoning is 1 unit. They are all pass, no pass, non-degree applicable, which basically means it doesn't count against their financial aid. So there are 2 separate courses. So a grade is assigned for each of the classes. Calculus 1, you get a grade. The co-requisite, you get a grade, but it's pass, no pass in the co-requisite. These are scheduled back to back. The Calculus 1 with the co-requisite, it's the same teacher. It's a seamless just-in-time review that Dan will talk a little bit more about. Activity-based instruction, and this idea of wraparound services, meaning that we discuss and talk about helping our students, not just with the math, but in the other areas of their life as well, making sure that we are, that our students have access to personal counseling, making sure that we are instituting equity-minded syllabi, equity-minded grading strategies, things like that. So this is emerging. This is something that we're working on, and something that we're always kind of continuing to evolve in, right? Like all of us are. We're all trying to evolve and grow in this manner. So this fall semester is the very first time that we're offering these particular courses, Calculus 1 with co-requisite support. So you can see our overall enrollment in Calculus 1 from fall 2019, fall 2022, and fall 2023. You can probably imagine why I skipped over the other 2 semesters. But I just generally was trying to get an overview of what was happening before. So from fall 2019 to fall 2022, it's pretty on par with our enrollment, right, at census in Calculus 1. And we see in fall 2023 that now we have an 83% increase in overall enrollment in Calculus 1. So even if we get a 70% success rate, which, by the way, we would be happy to have a 70% success rate, right? We will still almost double the number of students that are successful in Calculus 1, which is going to help all students as they continue in STEM. For instance, many biology majors only need to take Calculus 1. That's the only class they need to take. So now they've been successful. So, so just kind of wanted to share that. In addition, if we take a look at the placement of students that are currently enrolled in Calculus 1, we can see that of those 87 students that are enrolled in Calculus 1 right now with support, so this is the Calculus 1 with support, right, that are enrolled in it. 67 of those 87 are taking Calculus 1 as a first math class in our district. We're a multi-college district, so we had them look everywhere in the district. And of those 67, 54 placed directly into pre-calculus. Based on our new placement rules, that means that 54 of the 87 students, or 62% of the students, have never had pre-calculus. We can do that. We can say that based on our placement rules, and assuming that students answered the questions correctly in the placement questionnaire. So I did a further analysis of this. I asked our research team to do a little bit of a further analysis of this by asking them, of those 20 students, right, that this isn't their first math class, right? How did they do? What did they take? What were their grades? So there are 20 students that are taking this class, and they've taken math in our district before. We've had I think about 8 or 9 of them took calculus and failed it. So they're now taking this class. One student came directly from statistics with support. And the others were coming from pre-calculus, several of them with multiple attempts, several of them that didn't, with multiple attempts and either getting a C or a no pass, several W's on their transcripts. So of those 20 students, almost all of them, right, about half, I think, were coming from pre-calculus, but many of them didn't do well in pre-calculus or took it multiple times. And the other half failed calculus or are coming from statistics, one student in particular. And, you know, when you look at the 54 versus 67, so that means 13 students directly placed into calculus, but decided or elected to register in calculus with support. So it's kind of where this data resides, if you will, right now. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan.
As we were designing this, this course, we basically took the same approach as we have for all of our co-requisite courses. We basically went through the calculus, the textbook that we had been using, and just section by section looked at every one of them and said, okay, so what pre-calculus skills or earlier skills would students need to be able to complete this material? And so every time we identified a skill like that, we just added it to the course content for the co-requisite course. We had a lot of discussions with the instructors that teach calculus regularly, along with the instructors that also teach pre-calculus, and just kind of talked it out about what are the skills that are essential. And there's no way that we could teach all of pre-calculus in those 2 units. We have to strategically choose what topics to include. And then we always do a just-in-time review. The way that we organize it, it's always just-in-time review. So it's not, we don't front load it with all of the co-requisite support stuff and then jump into the calculus. It's, we introduce the co-requisite skills whenever it is that we need them. So go ahead, and Tammy. Okay, so here is kind of an example out of the Canvas course, and this is module 2.1. The first chapter, all the module 1 stuff, is the orientation module. So this is first day of class material, and what we're covering here in this class, in this module, is average rate of change, or average velocity. And we start off, so then what we need to do is we need to determine what skills are going to be necessary for the students to be able to do this. And so average velocity requires slope, it requires working with functions, it requires distance, rate, and time, that sort of stuff that comes out of pre-calculus. So go ahead, Tammy. So now we need to know, how are we going to design the Canvas module for this, and also how are we going to prep for the class on this. So let's talk about the Canvas shell. So go ahead, Tammy. So this is the Canvas shell. The the module for prep for the average rate of change or average velocity. And basically the two big topics here are slope of a line and a secant line. So we're talking about slope there, and then actually calculating average rate of change. But this is just the pre-calculus material that supports this. When we're actually covering it in class, we maybe even dive a little bit further back. So we talk about function notation, we talk about distance, rate, and time, we talk about some other things that students may have been exposed to in intermediate algebra that they maybe need a little bit of refresher on. So, but we don't need any of the trig stuff at this point in the course. We don't need solving equations, except for one very quick example of that in the first lesson. It's not factoring polynomials. We don't need any of that yet. That comes a little bit later. And so when we get into 2.3, where we're doing limits, then the factoring becomes important there. So we throw in that in there. So that's basically how we're designing this whole thing, is just feed them a little bit of the prerequisite skills at a time whenever it is that they're going to need them. So, okay. And for my class, the way that we have them scheduled is the co-requisite is 1 hour, 1 unit in class and 1 unit online. So I have to decide what material is okay for them to do on their own and what material do I want to go over in class. And this is my first semester teaching this, and I'm still trying to figure that out right now. But basically I don't quite have enough time to cover all of the prep material, so I have to leave some of it for them to work through on Canvas. So, okay. So, and my first day, so here's how my first day starts. Very first thing we do, well, we talk about the syllabus first, but then after that, when we first start the material, basically what I do is I show them this video of
I'm ready to play if you want me to.
Go for it.
Okay. I did share my sound, so hopefully this works.
Every year for the past 40 years, a massive Halloween pumpkin has been tossed off the 11th floor of UC San Diego's Tioga Hall. That was 500 pounds of pumpkin and 100 pounds of candy slamming into the ground. Want to see it again? The gourd stuffed with candy sent sweet and yellow shrapnel flying over a 101-foot 6-inch radius, a new record. Senior carpenter and official pumpkin splat measurer Denny Ray Bradford says there are several things that factor into this year's record-breaking splat.
How it landed, velocity, candy helped it out quite a bit.
Jack Burndy's grew the massive squash, and he had only about 4 months to do it. He says his water bill to grow the 500-pound pumpkin was over $1,000. He said it grows so fast you can see it.
Yeah, I at times thought I saw it growing. My buddy had an instrument that could calculate movement, and he said in the middle of the day he can see the gauge move.
Freshman Matthew Yu almost missed the big splat, but he's glad he didn't.
It was amazing. I mean, I heard a big boom and didn't really expect that to happen. I mean,
Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
Okay, so I show that video as a pretty big gets their attention pretty quickly, and then we go into the goal for this lesson is to determine the velocity of the pumpkin when it hits the ground, and basically this actually ends up being our overarching theme or overarching problem for the entire first chapter, because we have to develop limits before we can actually find the impact velocity. But this lesson is kind of setting us up for that, of leading us why is it that we need limits. So so Mallory posted in chat the activity that I presented at the conference, that I had the instructors, attendees go through. And this is basically summing up what I did my first day in class. So So as we work through this, and it starts off really basic, and so what I always want to do anytime we're doing an activity is where do we think the students will hit hurdles, where are places that we want to intervene and have a class discussion, but also just developing something like this. You see an example like this, how could you fit this lesson into your course or make it your own? So if you want to look at that activity and do that. So we don't have time to go through the whole activity for this, but we can talk about kind of how this whole thing works. So looking at the activity, can you bring that up, Tammy?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask. Yeah, let me make it bigger. Just tell me how to scroll.
Okay. So we start off, and so our goal is to find how fast the pumpkin's falling when it hits the ground. And for this activity, we give them an equation, and I tell them at this point that, yeah, in the real world, you're not given an equation when you're doing something like this. And we will figure out by the end of the semester how to come up with this equation. But for now, we're just be given the equation anytime we do anything like this. And so then I ask them, okay, so how high is the pumpkin above the ground after 1 second? What about 2 seconds? And then we go into function notation, but that's a place where students get hung up a little bit. They don't understand that not everyone is completely familiar with function notation. What does h of 1 mean or h of 2 mean? And so we have a little discussion about that and basically go through this. Then I have them calculate h of 3, and then they end up with a negative answer on that because the pumpkin hits the ground at about 2.5 seconds. And so we have a discussion about that. What does that mean? And so then that leads us into a discussion about the domain. The domain for this problem is so they calculate when it hits the ground. That's the first real major hurdle that they run into, is how do we set up that equation to solve it and work through that. So we spend a bit of time on that. But then we set up here the domain. We talk about the intervals. It goes from 0 to 2.5 seconds. And then interval notation, we talk about that a little bit there too. So we just basically are just building these skills leading up to as we go. So from there, we pivot into distance, rate, and time, because we're talking about velocity here. I have them kind of work through that a little bit, figure out an equation, get the equation R equals D over T. And so then I have them do a few examples here of different times on this pumpkin, going back to the original equation that we had at the beginning. But then from there, we pivot again and we start talking about slope. And so go ahead to the next page. And so we start talking about slope, which seems on the surface very unrelated to it, but then that gets tied back into it again when we start calculating slope on the original curve. So we do an example of just this made up example here of some straight line, but we do it based off of the curve. And then they start to realize at that point that, wait, this is not only the same answer that I got above, but it's also the calculation's exactly the same. And so then we start to relate these two concepts of average velocity with slope. And so just kind of working through this, building up the skills as we go. And at any point, the students, if it seems like they're having any trouble with it, that we can just stop and have a discussion. And that's the nice thing about having the extra hour each week in class, is we have the time to do that. But the entire thing comes back together and leads up to the difference quotient here. And so that's the main takeaway from this first lesson is this, but you can't just start with this for students that haven't had pre-calculus yet, because they just won't have the skills. So we have to build up to it as we go. So, okay. So and so here's some examples of some student work. So any questions about that activity or
I don't see any questions about the activity there is one question that I need to answer, but
okay.
I don't think it's not about the activity.
Yeah, so here's some of my actual students' notes that they took during this this lesson. I made the mistake of calling, I told him it was the difference equation instead of difference quotient, but I fixed that the next day. So.
Right, I'm going to stop sharing. So there is one question in the Q&A that I wanted to answer live because I realized it was going to take a long time for me to type the answer. And that is, who takes pre-calculus at Cuyamaca? So students who take, the way our placement questionnaire works is our students answer some questions about what the classes they took in high school, their high school GPA, and the grade they received in the highest class they took in high school. We kind of define that a little bit for them in the questionnaire. And then also we ask them what they're planning to study, so that when the student, so after they hit enter, the student gets a placement automatically in the system, but then they also get a pop-up window that tells them what math class and English class they're supposed to take at Cuyamaca. So for instance, if a student took pre-calculus in high school, but they are a business major, then we're going to be telling them they should take applied calculus and statistics. If a student took pre-calculus in high school, but they're a STEM major, then we'll tell them they should be taking calculus 1, right? So it just depends. So that's kind of how it is with regards to that. There is no transfer level prerequisite to pre-calculus. Pre-calculus is basically our floor when it comes to STEM majors. We do have a pre-calculus with support class that is now pretty much for students who have never taken Algebra 2, Integrated Math 3, Integrated Math 2, those kinds of classes, or a student who maybe took pre-calculus, took Algebra 2 and didn't do so well in it and would like to have some extra support for the same reasons that Dan just talked about in calculus. With regards to pre-calculus. And yes, students can place direct into pre-calculus as well. As I talked about at the beginning, that is based on a student's course taking history and their high school GPA. Depends on whether they're placed directly into pre-calculus or whether they're placed into pre-calculus with support. The students that are these pre-calculus students that can take calculus 1 are students who placed directly into pre-calculus. A student who places into pre-calculus with support does not have access to this calculus with support class, at least yet.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Cuyamaca and Cabrillo, for sharing some of the great work you're doing to support students in math and English at your respective colleges. We have a little bit more time. I don't know if our guest speakers have any final thoughts or reflections, maybe lessons learned that you'd like to share with participants in the webinar who are perhaps earlier on in their implementation of co-requisite support.
So in my class, I feel like, I don't know how many of my students haven't had pre-calculus, but over the 2 sections, the only data that Tammy would share is combined between the 2 sections. But I assume I have about 2/3 of my students haven't had pre-calculus, and I feel like my students are picking up the material better in this course than they normally do in my regular math calculus course without support for students that are either have taken pre-calculus with us or have placed into calculus directly. So that extra time that I have to work with my students, I feel like even the normal calculus students could benefit from that as well. And the lack of the prerequisite is not as much of a hindrance as it seems like it should be, but they seem to be doing really well in my calculus class. My one big concern coming out of the chapter on limits that ends with the definition of the derivative limit as h goes to 0 definition was that I was behind schedule. But last week at the end of the 8th week, we're halfway through the semester, I looked and I'm exactly in the same position that I'm scheduled to be in my regular calculus class from the previous semester. So, so I feel like this is being very successful so far. We don't have completion data yet or success rates yet because this is our first semester, but it is looking very promising.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Terrence, did you have anything you'd like to add for Cabrillo?
Well, actually, I was going to ask Dan a follow-up question. Is one of the aspects that you're touching on is your experience of teaching the class. So success rates are great, right, in getting students to complete their requirements. But one of the challenges with this remediation reform has been the additional stress and angst for faculty. But the tone I heard in your voice was more hopeful and optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, all of my experiences with the co-requisite supports, or even going all the way back sooner with acceleration, back with our pre-stats class that we started back in 2010, 2011, something like that. It's every step of the way. It's been successful. We've seen much better throughput rates from start to finish. So I always go in with the attitude that the students can do it. I just need to figure out a way to get them there. And so it's just experience has taught me that the shortening the pipeline is way more successful than trying to just making them go through a long pipeline is going to be way more detrimental to them. So when we very first started our pre-stats class, one of the other instructors was talking to Myra and Katie and said, I had a horrible day. It was such a horrible class and I'm a horrible teacher, but and then Myra came back and she was very supportive of her. And Katie said, it doesn't matter. You shorten the pipeline. The students will end up better anyway. Even if you are a bad teacher, it still will work out better, but we always try to be the best that we can. And so it takes a little bit of pressure off, knowing that changing the way the system works is going to be an improvement, even if I'm not even if it's very uncomfortable for me to start this. And every step of the way, it's always had the same thing. As soon as the idea is brought up, initial reaction is, this will never work. There's no way that this could work. But as time has shown, it's been successful every step of the way. So.
Yeah, and that leads into, I guess I'm going to keep asking questions, but it's similar to the Karine asked a question, so I'm going to merge our questions. Is, because we keep doing something new, I too keep expecting the wheels to come off, but we pull it together. So the new thing about really looking this direction of relaxing prerequisites in that trend. And so especially for y'all who are teaching the calculus sequence, and let's say you're getting into calculus 2 and you have things like partial fraction decompositions, a lot of trig functions, things like that. Are you concerned about it? Are you seeing co-requisites as a way to help support or augment that? And it could be for both, Tammy and Daniel, in terms of that, where your head's at in terms of Calc 2, for example.
So we don't have any plans of offering co-requisite support for Calc 2. We don't feel that it's necessary. I mean, I'm not saying that it will never change in the future, but we don't have any plans right now of even developing something like that. For the skills from pre-calculus that we don't end up working on in Calc 1, like the partial fraction decomposition, a lot of the trig stuff. There's kind of two things they're going to come back with that. One is we're going to be developing prep modules for Calc 2. And it'll be kind of work through them on their own time type of thing. But the other thing is, most of the stuff in Calc 2 that we don't cover in Calc 1 that comes from pre-calculus, I'm pretty much assume that they don't remember it anyway and have to review it in class. So I don't feel like it's going to be as big of a hurdle as it seems like on the at first, because yeah, there are definitely going to be some skills, but that they're going to be missing, but we're going to have to talk about them in class anyway. And a lot of the stuff can be handled with modules in Canvas, just extra prep modules.
All right, excellent. Well, I guess I turned it into me interviewing you. So this is a good example of how to do some research, to take the time to talk to your colleagues, interview them. And that's really valuable information for me too, to hear from my colleagues just on that on the ground day-to-day level, how things are going. And because if an implementation is stressful and if it saps the hope out of you, I mean, that's going to impact your performance and your longevity. And so that's, even though I very much want us to be student-centered and doing what's for students, there's also being employee-centered and making sure that our employees are also, looking forward to going to work every day, especially after what we've been through. So thank you, Dan, for, modeling that other qualitative aspect of research. Michelle, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you, Terrence. We always appreciate your input. So from the interviews, what we heard kind of loud and clear and from our colleges today is that this design and implementation of co-requisite support is a continuous process. It's one that involves a lot of evaluation and refinement. And our colleges are really evolving and expanding, what it means to offer this level of support to students. So more adjustments and improvements to come, but kind of going back to what Daniel shared, it can look messy sometimes, and it can be frustrating when it comes to how do we assess what is effective and what is not. But at the end of the day, we're seeing a lot of positive student outcomes. So I think we know we're on the right track. I just wanted to mention that the slides have been posted in the Q&A, but we'll also be posting the slides and recording to the NMAP webpage on the RP Group website. We are just a little bit ahead of time, but I want to thank everyone, our college guests today, everyone that's on the webinar for joining us in this important conversation.